Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. Today, we're going to be analyzing the Republican Party's recent surge across two southern states, specifically the states of Arizona and Georgia. These are two states that have been traditionally Republican-leaning states, voting for the GOP pretty much every single election back until, I believe, the 1990s when I think Clinton won Arizona, and I believe he won Georgia as well. I'm not 100% sure about that. But really, ever since the 1990s, the states of Georgia and Arizona have been solidly Republican-leaning states. That said, Joe Biden did manage to win both of them in 2020 by very slim margins, mostly because he did very well in the suburbs of those states, which traditionally tend to vote more Republican, but a lot of those voters were turned off by Trump's, I guess you could say, loud and maybe annoying rhetoric. And those voters were, they didn't like Trump, so they voted for Biden, and because of that, they swung the states very narrowly into Biden's column. However, recently polls have suggested that Republicans are doing very well in these states, both in the Senate and governor elections, as they both have Senate and governor elections. We're starting in the state of Arizona, where there is a hotly contested Senate race between incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly and Blake Masters. Mark Kelly is a former astronaut. He was elected in 2020 in the special election by a pretty slim margin. He did better than Biden, and he basically branded himself as this, like, moderate, centrist Democrat, suburban, I guess you could say, just, he said he would be this moderate centrist Democrat. And yet he is voted in line with Joe Biden basically 100% of the time. And unlike Kyrsten Sinema, who is also the senator from Arizona, at least Kyrsten Sinema like bucks party line occasionally and makes headlines for being, a little bit more moderate. Well, Mark Kelly just votes with Biden and is pretty much nowhere to be found really when you look at the issues. And so the Republicans nominated Blake Masters, who is the a former venture capitalist with Peter Thiel. He represents a more populist wing of the Republican Party. This is a wing that usually does not do very well in a state like Arizona, although Trump did win the state in 2016 and lost in 2020. And if you look at the recent Senate elections, like in 2020 and 2018, the more, I guess you could say, populist Republicans don't usually do too well there. That said, Blake Masters has pretty much, it hasn't shocked me, but a lot of political analysts have been shocked that Blake Masters is getting this race so competitive so quickly. I'm not really that shocked. Blake Masters is a really smart guy. He knows how to play his cards right. And because of that, if we come down here, we look at the polls, we have really seen, really since mid-August, I guess you'd say, a very big surge for Blake Masters. A lot of the polls back in August around the primary, whether it be Fox News having Blake Masters down by 8 points, RMG having him down by 7 points, even Trafalgar having him down by 4. And while, yes, he is still down based on this poll from Emerson College, Emerson College is one of the more accurate pollsters in the country. They are usually very accurate. Them and Trafalgar are my two kind of go-to pollsters. Trafalgar and Emerson are usually the most accurate pollsters. So if you want to look at polls to really trust and look at, it's usually Trafalgar and Emerson. And they both have Blake Masters surging. If we come down here, Trafalgar back in end of August had Blake Masters down by 4. Emerson College only has him down by 2. And while yes, Blake Masters still may be down, this is a huge improvement when we compare it to last cycle. Emerson College back in the 2020 special election, as you can see here, Mark Kelly won this special election by about 3 points over Republican Martha McSally. Come down here. Let's look at not the counting results. Let's look at the polls. The polls from 2020, the 2020 Senate race. Emerson College, right here, had Mark Kelly winning by 11 points back in 2020. So around this time in 2020, they had Mark Kelly winning by 11. He went on to only win by 3. So this time in 2020, they were overestimating Mark Kelly by like 7 points or so. They had Mark Kelly winning by 11. He won by 3. Yeah, they overestimated Mark Kelly by 7 to 8 points. Right now, they only have Blake Masters down by 2. So if that same trend were to occur, Blake Masters would win this race by like 5, 6 points. Do I think he's going to? No. But the math is certainly there that if we look at past election results and past polling data from this very accurate pollster, it is clear Blake Masters is already surging and is probably going to win the Senate race. He still has a lot of he still has a lot of ground to gain. He's still down, obviously. But it's clear that if trends continue, which I see no reason they won't at this point, then Blake Masters will probably be the next senator for Arizona and defeat Mark Kelly. Another thing to note is since the primary election, Mark Kelly has not been above 50%. For an incumbent Democrat that is, very well known, Mark Kelly is a very famous guy. He spent like the longest time in space, I think, of any human, like something crazy like that. Like he is the human to spend the most time in space, something like that. He is a very famous guy, and he has not even gotten above 50%. Meanwhile, Blake Masters is pretty much a nobody. He's a political outsider. He's really not that well known outside of Republican-leaning circles, and he's already got within a few points of Mark Kelly. He's already pulling around 45%, 43. This outlier here, Insider Advantage, hit him down by a lot, but they're a Republican-leaning pollster. Don't really count them. Trafalgar and Emerson are much more accurate. And so Mark Kelly, like I said, he is a very famous guy. He won his win in 2020 was seen as this huge victory for, and he's a very well known guy. And he's not even getting close to 50%. While Blake Masters is a pretty unknown candidate outside of right wing circles, and he's already making this race close. And if we look at past polling from Emerson College, it's clear that Blake Masters is still going to surge a lot more before the general, and he already really has. If you look at this graph here, as you can see, Blake Masters is already making this race very competitive, and he's a smart guy, great candidate for the state. And it looks like this surge is going to get him over the hump, and I do think he's going to win the Senate election. Going over the governor race, we have Kari Lake, the Republican nominee, taking on Katie Hobbs. This is a race that a lot of people said Kari Lake's too far right to win. She won't win. But yet, if you look at the pollsters, it's clear that she has a good shot of winning. Trafalgar and RMG Research both had her up over Katie Hobbs. And Katie Hobbs is not that likable. I mean, she's not a very good candidate. And while Lake isn't perfect for Arizona, she is still she has a likable personality. She's very outgoing, and she is very charismatic, which you cannot say the same about Katie Hobbs. And Kari Lake overall has done a pretty good job running a general election campaign. Her primary race was a lot closer than most people thought it was going to be. She was leading in the polls by like 10 points or so. Only went on to win by about 5, so there is clearly some more moderate Republicans that aren't big fans of her. But still, even then, she's made this race close. She's leading in quite a few polls. Only one poll recently has her down, and that's only by 1, and that's by insider advantage, which yes is technically a Republican internal, but because of that, even Republican internals often shift the polls to make their candidates seem like they're losing, so Republicans spend more money and possibly even, turnout. Like this race, they only have Katie Hobbs up by 1. If you're a Republican who's on the fence about voting and you see your candidate's only down by a point, you're more likely than not going to vote for them because you know that your vote probably matters. So that is a tactic that pollsters do. I'm not saying that this is what they did here. Maybe the race is more competitive than making it out to be. Maybe I'm coping a bit. I don't think so. Because if you look at Emerson College and Trafalgar, which, like I said, are the most accurate pollsters, they have Katie Hobbs and Kari Lake in pretty much a statistical tie, or Kari Lake with a very narrow lead. And polls this far out usually overestimate Democrats. Katie Hobbs is a pretty bad candidate. She has not agreed to debate Kari Lake. She's not even going to debate her. While Kari Lake is blitzing the state, she's a very likable person. She's a former TV news anchor, so she's very well known, has a lot of recognition, and she is a pretty good candidate overall. I mean, she's great for Arizona, but when you look at her opponent and you look at how polls already have this race going, and Katie Hobbs not agreeing to debate is really hurting her from what I've seen, and she's barely getting 40%, 45% of the vote, and Kari Lake is doing very well. She's leading in quite a few pollsters that tend to be more accurate, or they're in a statistical tie, and Democrats usually underperform this far out. I'm not saying that, that always happens, but usually Republicans overperform summer polling. So the fact that the summer polls have this race so competitive and Kari Lake even with a narrow lead tells me that she's probably going to win this race relatively handily. Now we're going to take a look at Georgia, the Senate election between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Polling for this race originally showed Herschel Walker in a very good spot. You can see here a lot of polls from like April, March, February, January of this year had Herschel Walker absolutely obliterating Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Democrat. And as you can see here, as the July Democrat surge came around, Raphael Warnock did begin to do a little bit better. But now, recently, as you can see here, Herschel Walker has retaken this lead, and I expect him to hold this lead. There might be a few polls here and there that show Raphael Warnock with a narrow lead, but I do believe that Georgia is going to end up being a relatively solid Republican win for Herschel Walker. Trafalgar and Emerson, like I said, the two best pollsters in America. Trafalgar has Herschel Walker up by 1. Emerson has Herschel Walker up by 2. Both of them are below 50%, which is a little bit of a cause for concern. For those of you who do not know, Georgia uses a runoff system. So if a candidate does not get above 50%, then there is a runoff election, which takes place in January. If that is the case, that probably isn't the best news for Herschel Walker, because as we saw last time, the Republicans, both Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, I believe, did win the election in a Senate election in 2020, but they didn't reach 50%. There was the runoff. A lot of Democrats were very energized, and they ended up both losing. So ideally, we want Herschel Walker to be above 50%. Is he going to be? I'm not quite sure. No polls have him above 50%. There's really only one, and that was back in April. So right now, I think this race is going to head for a runoff. I think Herschel Walker will win the first ballot, but as of now, this race does look like it's going to head for a runoff election, and that really just depends. Usually Republicans do well in runoff elections, but recently they have not, so we'll have to just wait and see, I guess. But it's clear Raphael Warnock does not have a lot of energy, and the other thing to note is that the key to Raphael Warnock's victory with suburban white voters. So the suburbs of Atlanta, which usually, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, they usually vote Republican. But in 2020, they didn't like Trump, so they voted for Biden, and then they also voted for Raphael Warnock. Those same suburbs, the counties and the suburbs of Atlanta, which are very white, they're relatively upper white, middle class suburbs, maybe a little bit upper class. They are some of the places where Biden is the least popular. They have absolutely turned on Biden, and while they may not like Trump, they're not very big fans of Joe Biden, and they're going to vote Republican this cycle. I mean, I'm not saying Herschel Walker's going to like dominate there, but they're certainly going to take a relatively big swing to the right, the suburbs of Atlanta. And because of that, I think that Herschel Walker's in a good spot. I mean, Trump only lost Georgia by like 10,000 votes in 2020, and if suburbs are pretty densely populated areas, and those are some of the places where Biden is the least popular and has lost a lot of support. And so because of that, I do think that Herschel Walker, that's going to be key to Herschel Walker's victory, is getting strong turnout in those suburbs, some of that anti-Biden vote among more moderate, I guess, traditional Republican suburbanites. And you can see here, he's already kind of started to do that. He's leading in a lot of the polls. He's been getting to poll ahead. Like I said, Raphael Warnock may make a few small gains here in polls, but I do think that Herschel Walker is going to win this race relatively handily. The runoff, I think we'll just have to wait and see how well he does in the runoff, if it even goes to a runoff. But I think as of now, Herschel Walker is a pretty good candidate for this race, and I think he's going to win this election relatively handily. Let's go to the governor race here, where Brian Kemp will be taking on Stacey Abrams. Brian Kemp is the incumbent Republican. A lot of people said this was going to be a very competitive primary, but really didn't end up being so. Brian Kemp easily defeated David Perdue in the primary, and because of that, Brian Kemp had a very smart play when you think about it. He kind of positioned himself to be more or less anti-Trump, which helped him a lot with suburbanites in Atlanta. The anti-Trump suburbanites, which I've talked a lot about. Those more moderate voters in the suburbs really liked Brian Kemp. They voted for him in the primary, and then Kemp won the primary, and a lot of the more Trumpian voters have come home. And because of that, Brian Kemp is absolutely obliterating Stacey Abrams in polling. He's up 50-42, 48-44, 48-46. A lot of these polls have had him up by even more. And Brian Kemp is probably going to win this race by about 5 points or so. This is going to be a landslide victory for Brian Kemp, not for Georgia standards nowadays. And that's because, like I said, Brian Kemp played his cards right. He got lucky. He positioned himself kind of anti-Trump, which allowed him to gain a lot of support among more moderate suburban voters and just moderate voters in general. But also, he was conservative enough that after the primary was over, a lot of the more Trumpian voters in the rural areas and the more anti-Kemp voters were like, you know what, this guy's still fine. He's not perfect, but he's still good. We're going to support him. And Stacey Abrams, as you can see here, she's getting absolutely obliterated in polling, which tells me that she's probably going to lose by even more, because polling, like I said, usually overestimates Democrats, especially this far out. So if Brian Kemp is already absolutely destroying Stacey Abrams, then it's probably going to be a pretty easy win for him. So with that, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe for more.